Welcome back. You're watching The Fix with me, Karima Brown. I'm in conversation with Justice Minister Ronald Lamola. Let's take a listen to what he had to say on the 30th anniversary of Nelson Mandela being released from prison on why it's important to protect the independence of the judiciary.
Decisions of judges are not above criticism. Judges criticize each other, academics criticize judgments, but it is done in a fair, balanced and informed manner by facts and the law. It is not an unwarranted personal attacks on the person of the judges, conspiracies and other unfounded allegations which are just aimed to derail and denigrate the personalities of judges. Judiciary must be anyone who does that personal degradation of the judiciary must be condemned by all citizens of our country.
Now, of course, Minister, no one can disagree with what you've said. You've reiterated that here on this program. But let's go to whether the justice system is failing ordinary South Africans. We've dealt with the politicians and the fact that they are suddenly running scared because the justice system is ending the culture of impunity. But we saw, for example, the horrific killing of a young girl from Elsies River whose body was found in a drain in Worcester. We have an accused man who is a repeat offender who was granted parole. What is your message to the family of Tanze, the little girl whose body was found? How do you reassure them that repeat offenders aren't let loose so that they can go on a spree of crime in the way that we've seen?
Yeah, it is an unfortunate incident, and we have to sympathize with the family and send our condolences. What we have looked at and analyzed, and even the previous minister, is the parole system. How does it affect the rehabilitation and also of the offenders? And what has become clear out of all the assessment is that those who mostly reoffend are the people who are sentenced for short sentences of 2 years or less than, because we don't have enough time in terms of our system. There are those who have served long sentences who sometimes reoffend, but the percentage is very low, very, very low.
Minister, let me come in here. The question of sentencing and life sentences is very important because people are asking, what does life actually mean? Is it 25 years? Is it 25 years with parole? When you say you are having zero tolerance for people who murder women and children, what exactly do you mean when you say a life sentence? Is it life without parole? What is it? Because I think the public seems to be confused and there is no clear message coming from government.
Yeah, maybe to conclude on the first one is that short sentences usually is what has become clear to us, that they are the most ones who reoffend. And also in this case, that is the situation that we have now seen. With regard to the sentence, a life sentence, if the judge will not want the person to be given parole, it will then come with the sentencing that the person can be considered for parole after a particular number of years, and this one may never be given parole and so forth. So there are various streams in terms of the judgments and in terms of the system after you have been given life sentence. There could be a situation where a person has a life sentence when there are no conditions, who can at some stage be considered for parole, depending on how he conducts himself in the cells, and after a number of years, there may be a situation where that person can be released.
In your view, Minister, and again without prescribing to the judges, a person who rapes repeatedly, is that person ever fit to be considered for parole?
Yeah, obviously that is also governed by the fact that there have been judgments in the past that also guide our work. And I am responsible to look into the paroles of any lifer person who has been.
So what do you take into consideration? Let's take a situation where, we don't have to quote the numbers. Everyone in South Africa knows the extent of gender-based violence. It's easier to get raped in this job than to get a job now in this country. Now, when do you consider a rapist, a repeat offender, a person who's an abuser, or when do you consider that such a person is fit for parole?
I consider such issues when deciding whether or not this person should be granted. The fact that this person is a repeat offender, the fact that this person has committed a heinous crime, the fact that this person has proven that he may not be rehabilitatable. All those factors also come through various reports, including experts who helped me make the decision. So there are those checks and balances in the system.
But Minister, you keep on saying there are checks and balances. If there were checks and balances, why was Tanze killed by someone who was in the system and fell through the cracks again in order to get out and repeat what he has done before?
As for example, with regard to some of the matters, you will find that the person was not inside for rape or for a heinous crime. The person came in for 2 years or for 1 year or for 1 month or 6 months. So it becomes difficult for the system to rehabilitate. But if the person has come through all the ranks for 15, 20 years, by the time I receive the report, for example, I deal with the lifers. You have all the life of the person, the psychology is assessed. You know that this person has undergone the various programs. But we don't take a decision easily, even in that regard.
Minister, give us a number in terms of the lifers in South Africa, because I have spoken to people in the criminal justice system. They say that we have an enormous amount of life-serving prisoners, and it is actually unsustainable because prisons themselves, we know, become toxic places where people who perhaps come in for a small crime actually get brutalized in that system, comes out a hardened criminal. How many lifers do we have in South Africa?
For example, only with sexual offences, I think it's rape, it's about 21,000 across the country. It's a huge number. And
so we have 21,000
almost, yeah.
lifers for rape.
Unfortunately, I don't have the exact number, but I think we have about that 20 or 21,000. But we can verify. But I think it's
Minister,
at that
how
level.
does this compare with other countries in the world, or even just in the continent?
It's a huge number, and I think it also shows that the justice system does convict people on a day-to-day basis. What is the biggest challenge now in our country is the fact that sometimes the people who commit the crime end up not being arrested, end up not being prosecuted. That is the number that we need to deal with. Those that do commit the crime and they don't get into the system up until they are convicted. But as we sit here, on a day-to-day basis, our courts are convicting and handing over heavy sentences for this kind of crime.
Now, of course, the courts and your bit is one part. We have correctional services. That is a critical part.
Yes.
I read yesterday, as I was doing research for my interview with you, I read the reflections of a former prison warder. And what happens in prison is horrific. He was explaining the brutalization, the violence, the rape that happens when young people are brought in for the first time, perhaps for misdemeanors, and end up brutalized by that system. How do you work with your counterpart in correctional services to make sure that prisons don't become factories that turn out even worse monsters than the people who were convicted for crimes when they went into the system?
It's not my counterpart, it's myself. I'm also responsible for correctional services. So
if you could take us into your confidence.
As I have said already, there has been research that has been done in terms of the rehabilitation program. And the rehabilitation program has now been reviewed to respond to the program that relates to rehabilitating each and every offender, and also to professionalize the entire parole board system, so that we are able to see the life of the offender from the date when he was convicted up until the date when he or she exits the cells, whether this person has undergone psychiatric, social work observation, also whether this person has received some kind of skill. They also do some kind of work which is also part of this rehabilitation program. Now,
Minister, when you explain all these things, the picture that ordinary people often get is that you invest more in the criminals than in the communities themselves. People think that the state feeds criminals, they house them, they educate them, but you don't do the same for communities where there are no jobs, where there's unemployment. What is your message to communities, and why is it important to err on the side of human rights and not say that people who are in prison are in fact to be damned? How do you balance that out? What do you say to people?
This program has proven that with this rehabilitation program, the number of reoffending is very low. Because you will know, particularly amongst those who have been in our system for a long time, it's still very high amongst those who have been in the system for short sentences. But when you look at those who have been in our system for a long time, the reoffending is very low. So it does show that the rehabilitative program does have an impact on the life and changing the person. So you will imagine, because people do serve sentences and they finish their sentences. So particularly when you deal with life fast and so forth, it's a small number. But the huge number of our inmates, they will one day go back to society. They will one day go back into the community. They will one day be participants in the community. So it's important that when they are inside, we rehabilitate them, that by the day they go back to society, they are different people. They can contribute into the social and economic well-being of any society.
All right, Minister, we have to leave it there. We've run out of time. It's a conversation that we will probably have. We're looking forward to your budget vote speech to see whether you're going to put the money where it is required. Justice Minister Ronald Lamola. Up next, our education system, broken and unequal. We find out after the break. Stay with us.